Every prediction this channel has made since the first video is converging on a single moment. Wednesday, 48 hours from now. In May 2024 on this channel, we made a prediction that the United States would go to war with Iran. That came true. We predicted the Strait of Hormuz opening would be a fiction, and the ships turned back on the same day it was declared open. We predicted the ceasefire was fragile and the 10-day clock was the most dangerous variable in the crisis. We predicted Iran would use the pause to rearm. Every single one of those calls just proved out simultaneously. Iran has officially rejected the second round of peace negotiations. Iran's own state news agency, IRNA, stated formally that Tehran's absence from talks stems from Washington's, and I am quoting directly, excessive demands, unrealistic expectations, constant shifts in stance, repeated contradictions, and the ongoing naval blockade. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. The ceasefire expires Wednesday, April 22nd, and the IRGC Aerospace Force commander announced publicly this week, with video evidence broadcast on Iranian state television, that Iran has replenished its missile and drone stockpiles during the ceasefire at a faster rate than before the war began. Iran used the pause to reload. What you're about to hear is the most complete and the most honest assessment of where this crisis actually stands 48 hours before the most consequential deadline in modern Middle East history. Not the version where Trump declares victory, not the version where Iran claims it controls the strait, the version where the numbers, the military assets, the negotiating positions, and the historical patterns all point in the same direction. And that direction is darker than anything the mainstream coverage is currently describing. Once you see the full picture, you cannot unsee it. Let me build this from the precise facts, because precision is everything when the stakes are this high. The ceasefire between the United States and Iran was brokered by Pakistan on April 8th and set to expire on April 22nd, this Wednesday. It was the first face-to-face negotiation between Washington and Tehran since 2015. J.D. Vance led the American delegation. Iran's parliament speaker, Ghalibaf, led the Iranian delegation. The talks in Islamabad lasted 21 hours. They produced no agreement. Vance's exact words as he left Islamabad: "The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. They have chosen not to accept our terms." Iran's foreign minister's exact words after the same talks: "We encountered maximalism, shifting goalposts, and blockade." Two delegations, 21 hours. Two completely incompatible characterizations of what happened. That gap between they rejected our terms and they moved the goalposts is the structural fault line that has now produced Iran's formal rejection of a second round and a ceasefire expiry in 48 hours. Here's what each side actually wants, stripped of the public framing. What the United States requires: a complete end to all uranium enrichment, dismantling of all major enrichment facilities, surrender of Iran's entire stockpile of highly enriched uranium, an end to funding for allied militant groups across the region, and a fully open Strait of Hormuz with no Iranian toll charges. That is the American red line, as stated by Vance, by Trump, and by the White House. What Iran requires: the lifting of all primary and secondary sanctions, the release of frozen Iranian assets, continued Iranian control and sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, including the right to charge transit fees, the right to pursue uranium enrichment for peaceful civilian purposes, an end to Israeli attacks in Lebanon, and war reparations. That is Iran's stated position as reported by its own foreign ministry and state media. These two positions are not close. They're not in the same negotiating universe. The gap between complete surrender of your nuclear program and we keep enrichment rights as a matter of sovereignty is not bridgeable in 48 hours. It was not bridgeable in 21 hours in Islamabad, and it has not been bridged in 47 years of American-Iranian confrontation since the 1979 revolution. Now, the detail that changes the military calculus of everything happening Wednesday, the detail the mainstream press is underreporting. The detail that should alarm every serious analyst watching the situation. Iran's IRGC Aerospace Force Commander Majid Musavi appeared publicly this week in a video broadcast on Iranian state television. He was filmed inspecting an underground missile facility, drones in warehouses, missiles on launchers, mobile launch systems, and he made a statement that deserves to be read in full. He said Iran's speed in updating and refilling missile and drone launch platforms during the ceasefire was greater than before the war. He said if hostilities resume, Iran can launch the latest missiles and drones manufactured this month. And he said, directly, that America and Israel have lost this phase of the war, losing the Strait, Lebanon, and the entire region. That is not bravado for domestic consumption. That is a military commander communicating a verified capability to his adversary through public channels, a form of strategic signaling that every serious defense analyst understands immediately. Iran is telling America, we used your pause to reload. If you resume strikes on Wednesday, you're not hitting the degraded force you stopped hitting 2 weeks ago. You are hitting a force that has been replenishing at a rate faster than its pre-war production levels. The context makes this even more alarming. Prior to this conflict, Iran was producing approximately 10,000 drones per month. China has been providing precision machine tools, guidance components, and dual-use electronics that underpin both the missile and drone programs. The ceasefire did not interrupt those supply chains, it accelerated them. The pause in combat operations freed up Iranian industrial capacity that was previously consumed by active firing. A month of war, as one analysis put it, helped Iran's military industry learn for the next round. Iran still retains approximately 40% of its pre-war long-range attack drone arsenal and 60% of its ballistic and cruise missile launcher capacity. Those numbers represent the degraded baseline. The ceasefire has been partially refilling both stockpiles in real time. Let me now give you the full honest picture of the leverage balance, because this is where the mainstream narrative diverges most sharply from the structural reality. Trump's public position is that America holds all the cards. 3 carrier strike groups converging, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, back in the Red Sea after 300 days at sea, breaking the longest deployment record since Vietnam, 10,000 additional troops en route. The USS Spruance seized an Iranian vessel and blew a hole in its engine room. The naval blockade has turned back 23 ships. American forces are preparing to board and seize additional Iran-linked oil tankers in international waters in the coming days. That is real leverage. It is significant, and it is time-limited. Here is the asymmetry that every serious analyst knows, and almost nobody in the public conversation is willing to state plainly. Iran's leverage is structural and permanent. America's leverage is operational and time-constrained. The USS Gerald R. Ford has been at sea for over 300 days. Its crew has deferred maintenance. Its equipment needs overhaul. Its leadership has already told sailors the ship is expected home in May. The Ford can remain on station through Wednesday and into a resumed conflict. But a sustained multi-month campaign of escalated strikes requires a rotation of forces that America is currently struggling to sustain across multiple simultaneous commitments. The Ford went from Venezuela to Iran. Its replacement, the George H.W. Bush, is currently rounding the Cape of Good Hope, taking the long way around Africa because the Suez Canal route was assessed as potentially compromised. Iran, by contrast, does not need to project power anywhere. Its strategic asset, the Strait of Hormuz, is 21 miles wide and sits in its own backyard. It does not need a carrier strike group to threaten it. It needs IRGC fast attack boats and a minefield, both of which it has, and one of which it just restocked. American crude exports have surged to a record 4.9 million barrels per day in April 2026, roughly 23% of normal full Hormuz traffic. American energy producers are benefiting from the crisis that the rest of the world is suffering. That creates a domestic political dynamic inside the United States that is rarely discussed but structurally important. Every day the strait stays closed, American oil producers benefit financially. That is not an argument for keeping it closed, but it is a structural factor that reduces the immediate domestic political pressure on the administration to resolve the crisis at any cost. For Iran, the calculus is different. Its oil revenues have collapsed. Its rial is in freefall. Inflation was above 40% before the war. The blockade is strangling what remains of its trade. Every additional week without a deal is economically devastating for the Iranian government. But Iran's negotiating position throughout this crisis has been consistent. It will not accept a deal that its population and military perceive as capitulation. The credibility of the regime, which just survived the killing of its supreme leader, depends on being seen as not having surrendered. Here's what the 3 realistic scenarios for Wednesday actually look like in full, because the range of outcomes is wider than any mainstream outlet is currently acknowledging. Scenario 1, ceasefire extension. The most probable outcome based on the current structure of the negotiation. Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar are all working intensively to broker an extension. Iran's parliament speaker said there will be no retreat from diplomacy. Iran's president said the country has no intention of seeking war. Trump told Axios on Sunday he feels fine about the talks and believes the concept of the deal is done. A 2 to 4 week extension buys time for negotiators to narrow the gaps on nuclear enrichment and the Strait's status. Markets calm. Oil drops. The fundamental structural gap remains unresolved. Scenario 2. No extension, strikes resume. Iran retaliates with replenished arsenal. The worst case. Trump has explicitly threatened to destroy every power plant and bridge in Iran if no deal is reached. Iran's IRGC commander has explicitly confirmed the arsenal is restocked. A resumed campaign hits a more capable Iranian military than the one America stopped striking 2 weeks ago. Gulf air defenses, already depleted from the first phase, face a fresh wave of Iranian drones and missiles. The IEA's largest disruption in history enters its most severe phase. Brent crude moves toward $150. The global economy absorbs a supply shock with no historical precedent. Scenario 3, a partial framework, the most underreported possibility. Both sides accept a face-saving formula that neither publicly calls a deal. Iran agrees to a structured nuclear constraint with verification that does not use the word permanent in its public text. America agrees to a partial blockade lift tied to Iranian compliance steps. The Strait reopens under a formula that gives Iran nominal sovereignty language while restoring commercial traffic. Lebanon is separated entirely. A formal agreement is announced for some future date. Both sides claim victory to their domestic audiences. The fundamental disagreements remain, but they are managed rather than resolved. The base rate, based on everything we know, favors Scenario 1 or 3 over Scenario 2. But Scenario 2 is not off the table, and the IRGC's public announcement that it has restocked its arsenal means that if Scenario 2 occurs, it will be more destructive than the first phase of this conflict. The historical weight of this moment is not subtle. The last time America and Iran sat face-to-face at the negotiating table was 2015. That agreement took years to negotiate, involved 6 world powers, included the most intrusive inspection regime ever applied to a nuclear program, and was torn up by the same president who is now trying to replace it with a deal negotiated in 21 hours in a hotel in Islamabad. The structural reality that has defined every American attempt to resolve the Iran question since 1979 has not changed. Iran negotiates with a civilizational time horizon. America negotiates with an electoral cycle. Iran's most important economic relationship is with China, not America. Iran's most powerful strategic asset is geography, a waterway it shares with Oman that America cannot permanently control from 6,000 miles away. And Iran's domestic politics make visible capitulation existential for any Iranian government, regardless of what the military balance sheet says. Wednesday is Wadzin, 48 hours away. The ceasefire may extend. The deal may not be signed. The missiles Iran restocked this week may or may not be launched, but the foundational assumption that was shattered when the first ship turned back on the day the Strait was declared open, the assumption that statements and physical reality are the same thing, that assumption stays shattered regardless of what happens. Wednesday, watch the facts, not the statements. We will be here for every move.